let's go ahead and get started. I highly recommend that before you even tackle working on your pumpkin, get all of your raffia braided. And I'll quickly show you how I do it. Typically, I will do all of the braiding at night when I'm kind of unwinding and watching TV. I find it really relaxing. And then the next day is when I'll go ahead and work on physically getting it on the pumpkin. So I won't spend too much time showing you that piece. As you can see here though, I do have a piece that I'm working on. I just taped it onto this table as an anchor. And you're doing just a standard braid and relatively loosely. Now you can see here, every strand, I have 2 pieces of raffia that I'm using just to give it a bit more fullness. And you are literally just braiding and going through. I usually move pretty quickly because it doesn't need to be perfect. So I go all the way down, and I like to work with longer strands, so I have fewer. You just have to be careful that you're not knotting your raffia when you do that. So like every 10 strokes, I'll kind of stop and make sure that I pull the strings through. So at the bottom, right here, I just will quickly kind of tie it off. And then once tied off, you know how some people have beautiful braids in their hair and they're really thick and really full? Well, it's because they pull it apart. So I just go back through that strand and we'll pull very gently, just kind of pull apart the raffia to, again, give it some fullness. And you might see some gaps, but that's okay because once you start gluing, it's going to come a bit more together. So see how full that looks, and it's still a little bit tighter up in here. So go ahead and do all of your braiding and do your pull aparts. And I'm going to show you next how I go ahead and start laying my grid on the pumpkin. Also, highly recommend keeping your tails because I typically will tuck this into the pumpkin, and I'll show you how to do that. So I have 3 pumpkins here to show you. What your pumpkin is going to look like once you have all of the raffia attached. What your pumpkin that came in your kit looks like. I went ahead and painted it with chalk paint so it looks much nicer than the one that I'm going to use for today. And mine that I've just lightly sprayed with some spray paint. You can see the spray paint actually will eat the foam. But it's mine and I don't care, and it doesn't need to be as nice as yours. So I'm going to work on this one and I'll show you how I go ahead and get started. Now, I'll move these 2 out of the way. I mentioned that I like to do these pumpkins in a grid format, and I've come to realize that this absolutely is the best way to get a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful pumpkin. So your larger hole is going to be the bottom of the pumpkin. The smaller hole is going to be the top, and I'm actually going to label yours with a T and a B, so you don't even have to try and figure out which is which. So I'm going to start with the bottom because it's larger. This is where the majority of my ends are going to go when I'm getting started. And I'm taking this piece here. It's got a lot of extra. Sometimes I'll trim a few of these down just to have a few spare shorter pieces of raffia in case I need to tuck it into any holes that I may have at the end. And I'll show you when we get there. But I'm going to go ahead and lay the first part of my grid. So it's just going to be 4 strips. 1, 2, 3, 4, and as equal as I can get them. So I've got my really crummy, crappy old hot glue gun here. And actually I'll spin it this way so you can kind of see what I'm doing. So I'm going to put some hot glue all the way into the inside and then start doing it just like partially down the seam here. And I'm taking that end that I showed you and I'm just tucking it into the pumpkin. And then I only went to about here. So pushing down that first layer. Be mindful of your fingers. I have burnt mine about 100 times. If you do have like a lower setting for your glue gun, I highly recommend using that. If not, just be really careful and wait a minute before you go pushing down your raffia, because while my fingers are used to it, yours probably are not. Okay, so I'm just gonna glue the rest to here, and then I will show you the method that I do of keeping the same strand kind of moving without having to cut while I get that grid laid. So I'm gonna come over here to where I left off. I'm gonna need a new glue stick. I'm pretty low here. And just kind of do the same thing, running it all the way into this inside here. Making sure to not pull too tight because you don't want to necessarily thin out the raffia that you have. You want to make sure that it still stays pretty full, because otherwise you're going to be spending a lifetime just kind of going around in layers, and we also don't want you to run out of raffia. The roll that you have is more than enough to cover the whole pumpkin, so long as you are just mindful of how you're using it. Okay, so we did this first all the way in, right? And I'm gonna go ahead and just touch up a little dot right there on the inside to make sure that it goes down, because I was running out of glue at that part here. So basically, especially when we're gridding, we're gonna follow the same pattern of how we're gonna just keep our single strand, especially if you have a longer strand, it makes it a lot easier, as I mentioned. You're going to do a dot of glue right there. And then I'm gonna start doing this line coming up. And what I'm gonna do is, I also actually like to put a dot over here, kind of just push this guy over to the side and do like a really small fold so that I can keep running with that same strand and not have to worry about cutting. I'll show you one more time over here, and then I'm gonna go ahead and speed things up. So again, I'm coming down here. I'm putting a dot right there on the inside first, just to push him in. And then I'm going to do that fold that I showed you. So like a little glue here, a little glue right here on the side, and then starting to run down that other seam of the base. So put my finger right in the hot glue. Seriously, that happens to me so much. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and just put it on time lapse while I get our 4-point grid laid out here. And then I'll show you. I basically go and cut a line down the middle of all of these again in that same exact method. But I'll stop after I get the 4 laid out and tell you what I'm gonna do, which I did kind of just tell you. Okay, so my 4 grid is here. I'm gonna go back onto time lapse again, but I'm gonna use that same exact technique. And first, and you'll see it all on time lapse, I'm gonna go ahead and now cut each of these lines in half. By no means does it have to be perfect. I try and keep them pretty even, but there's not any, measurement that goes into it. It's more just me eyeballing. So first I'm gonna cut each of these with the raffia. Again, same method, working with that 1 strand if I can. If you run out of your 1 strand, doing that tuck method on the bottom and starting that new one. And then once I have the 8 that I mentioned, I then go back through one more time and cut those 8 in half. So when you are done with this step, you're gonna end up having 16 different raffia lines going on the pumpkin here. Okay, so you saw on the time lapse that I actually ran out on my first strand. So I just grabbed a new one and did that push that I told you about. You can actually see right here where my strand ended. No big deal, because it's gonna ultimately end up covered anyway. And you can see it's not perfect by any means, but I have my 16 lines on here. Now, basically the finishing method that I'm gonna show you now of how to go about and fill in the rest of the pumpkin. Since I have this nice long strand already working here, I'm just gonna leave it. This is gonna be my longer strand piece, and you don't have to do it this way. It's how I prefer. So I am still gonna keep actively using this, but essentially what we're gonna do is For every empty spot that we have now, again, they're not all going to be exact, but for the most part, they will follow this pattern where I'm going to do, now you're going to do some cutting, like a shorter piece, and then from my long strand here, a longer piece just to kind of finish it off. So let me show you what that looks like. Why don't we go here? So for my shorter strand, I'm going to first, I know now because I've done so many, but you want to eyeball to see with the strand that's already attached, approximately without too much work, what it's going to cover, right? And you can see here that once you put the two shorter strands in, this is going to cover beautifully. So for the shorter strands, take your other piece that you're working with, and I usually, for most of them, come up to about like here where I have my gun, but you're gonna just run down and get that piece in place and butt it up right to that side that you have right there. If you need to pull it a little bit to make it touch, great. If you have like a spot where you can see through and you want to fix it, just don't even push the glue gun, just kind of touch the nose there just to get a tiny bit, and you can pinch it together. And I'm going to run down to about like here. Now, if you want to cut it right now, you can, but you're going to do the same thing on the other side. So a lot of times what I'll do is, for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to use that folding method again. So I'm just going to I'll start by just kind of putting a little bit here and then also on this piece. Let it sit for a second so that you're not scalding your fingers. And then I will start. And if that pops up a little bit right here, it's not a big deal because you're coming back over with that long piece. So I'll run it up again. It doesn't even necessarily need to come all the way up to here. And if you see your end popping up, again, just a little dab of hot glue, wait a minute and push it down. But when you do that longer piece over top, it's gonna kind of pull this whole section together. So I'm gonna run to about here, I guess. You don't wanna overfill. So I'm gonna run it to here. Still that same shorter piece. And you'll see at the bottom, like you've got a little spot there to fill. You're gonna have a little spot up here. Now, before I trim this piece, I will do a little bit of hot glue on the back, like a little bit higher than where I need it, and lightly push it down. The reason why I do this is because you don't want your braid to just start unwinding on you, right? Of course, my scissors are like a scooch away, so I'm gonna scooch to get them. All right, so you can kind of see me in the little reflection. I just washed my hair, so I've got my little head turban on. Okay, so I'm just gonna come up here, try and get a little bit that has like a smidgy of glue so it doesn't totally unwind, and I cut it off. So you're short, and then you have your open in the middle. So you're just gonna come back to your long piece that's been hanging out up here, and basically in literally the same method that we've been doing this whole time, just run him down. If you see anything that you want to fill, just pull it apart a little bit before it sets, but he's gonna come all the way back down to the bottom where he's gonna hang out and wait for whenever you're ready for a next long run. So I will, again, one more time, just show you what that shorter piece looks like, but I think it's pretty simple, truthfully. Let's go, we'll go over here. So this is a little bit of a wider section. So potentially we might need to add a little more than the two shorts and one long, but let's see as we go. So I'm gonna take my piece again with that end that I lightly had some glue on. And I'm gonna run pretty much all the way down to almost the bottom, and I'm just gonna push it down. Now being mindful that this is a little bit of like a bigger section, I'm really now going to be mindful of, I don't want to pull it too tight because I don't want to have to glue any more raffia on than I have to. And truthfully, at the end, if there is anything that drives me nuts, I use whatever's left over and we'll go and fill that in. And I will show you kind of what I do there. I'm very, very OCD when it comes to my crafts. So I like to just kind of go in and fill anything that drives me nuts. So again, I'm just going to do that fold that we already had seen, put a little bit of glue, put some glue over here, and then I'm just going to run it up the side of this guy. And we'll see what the middle looks like. Okay, so you can see here, as I said, this is a little bit of a longer section. This piece likely is not gonna fill. I'm gonna have to add one more run. So what I'm gonna do is, it doesn't matter whether you do it with this piece at this point or the shorter piece that you were working with. I'm gonna do the shorter piece because it's actually so close to being done anyway. So I'm just going to, doesn't matter what side, pick a side basically, and run him back down before I take that long piece. Now, if the space that I had was, you know, only a tiny spot where I felt like it was going to show through, what I usually do in that event, and I'll show you right now, is I'll take one of my tails. So like this is perfect timing with this one. Because look, it's not necessarily long enough to even really tuck in. It's kind of like ending a little early. So I'm gonna glue all the way to the knot, but then, so I have it for later, I'll just trim off these little pieces of raffia, right? And if I had a teeny tiny space that I wanted to fill, and maybe I will, I'm not sure, after the braids are all down and I see where that space is, I can just glue this and kind of poke it in with my glue gun. So when I get to a point that I'm doing that, I'm definitely going to show you what that looks like. But let me fill in here and see if I think we're going to need to do that. I can kind of lay it out now. And truthfully, we actually might. It looks like there's still a little bit of a gap that's going to show. So it's kind of a great time for me to show you that method. So let me run now with my longer piece. I'm going to come back through just exactly as we've been doing, all the way up, and then I can do a little bit of pulling apart to see. There's a chance that I could kind of pull and fill that space, but I want to be able to show you the method that I told you I would of what to do if you do have a little bit of space there. So I'm going to pull him over to this side so that's full, and then I'll show you, look, I have like this little space in here that would drive me nuts, and I don't want to leave that. So if I wanted to, I could do it with a braid, but I want to show you what I was talking about with kind of filling with just the random raffia pieces. So what I do is I would go in there and like really, really lightly put a strip of glue. And then I would take any of just these random pieces that I have, and you don't want to push too hard with your fingers, but kind of push it in there. I don't want anybody getting burnt. And then just not pushing on the glue itself at all, but using that hot tip of the gun, kind of push it down and get it settled in there. And you'll see that I filled that crack. And that is just something that I like to do. I do that a lot at the end too. Like I see a little bit even on this other side. So probably I should have done another braid, but I'm gonna go with this method. So I put a little bit of glue down, like I said. I take, this is a bigger one of my extra pieces, and like lightly with my fingers, just get it going. And then with that tip of my gun, I really just kind of work that guy down into there, and there you go. It's full. This is the end. I went ahead and the last piece that I was working on just did tuck it into here using the butt of my gun. Why do I keep calling it the butt? And then kind of pinch the friends around it together to make sure that you can't see that white underneath. There you go. So I totally fixed it. But you know, look for those lovely hot glue spider webs that we get. You can use not hot glue, like you could use a crafting glue if you want, but it just takes forever to dry. And for something that has to be covered so thoroughly, I just wouldn't recommend. And you're also gonna kind of get your raffia pretty crunchy if you do that. So at this point, it is a matter of just going through. I've got like a little bit sticking up here. So I'll go ahead and just put a little glue under, and again, use kind of the nose, got it right that time, of my gun to push and cover. And then stem. So you're gonna flip it. You'll be able to tell truthfully which end was the bottom. The end that has a little bit more of a roundness to it is your top, but truthfully, looks super cute either way. Nobody would be able to tell the difference. But attaching your stem, if you have your own stem and don't want to use the piece of driftwood that came with it, that's great. If you have any wire or any fake leaves or anything that you want to attach, that's awesome too, but just don't do that until you feel pretty certain that you have everything else kind of finished. So my stem is actually downstairs, but put some glue in here, not too much, and then you're just gonna stick the stem in, and that's pretty much it. I am going to do a virtual craft along on this for anyone that wants to join. So please just send me a message so I know and I'm not doing it for myself, but that's going to be on Sunday, October 18th at 8 p.m. EST. And if you have any questions, it'll be a great time for me to kind of answer them. I just ask that you pre-braid your raffia so that we can keep things moving, because that can take some time. So grab that raffia, go watch some TV or a movie and get that braided. And if you're going to join the virtual craft along, then fantastic. You do not have to be on video if you don't wish to. If you would like to, great. And I'm trying to think what else I can tell you.